Right, okay, so this video is structured exactly as the exactly the same way as the other videos. If this is the first video that you've watched, it'll be shown a screen. On that screen will be a really simple instruction like define these terms or evaluate this or do this. Pause the video, one colour pen, write everything you can remember, so restart the video, different colour pen, add anything in that you've missed or you're not sure of. Don't just watch the video, you won't take it in, you'll get distracted, your eyes will wander, anything like that, and then it'll have been a waste of this really good time that you've quite wisely put aside for revision. Please can you define the following terms? Pause the video, make your notes, and then unpause the video. Okay, so aim, to investigate, and it states the area of the research. Hypothesis, it makes a specific prediction and must be operationalised. So what it says on the spec is that you need to know the aim, you need to know the hypothesis, but also what they are. So the term aim always says to investigate, hypothesis always makes a prediction, but you must also be able to tell me the difference between the two. The aim states the area of the research, gives you a broad idea. The hypothesis makes a specific prediction that is operationalised regarding the area of research. So the aim would say something like to investigate the effects of hydration on problem solving, and the hypothesis would be very specific. So for example, people who are well hydrated, i.e. have drunk 8 cups of water that day, will be able to solve a puzzle 15 times more quickly than a group that have only drunk 1 cup of water or no water. So there you have made a prediction and you've operationalised, even if it's directional or non-directional, whereas an aim just tells you the broad ideas. Directional, boys will be better at maths than girls. Non-directional, there'll be a difference between boys and maths and their girls' ability. So between boys and girls and their maths ability. Now I'm sure you've all spotted a problem with this, and we will talk about in a moment. The IV is manipulated by the experimenter. The two conditions, we always pick which one it is. The DV is measured by the experimenter, so it's the thing that's measured. You must operationalise, which I'm sure is what you spotted. My hypotheses were not operationalised. So you have to, the IV is where you name both conditions, and the DV is explain how you'd measure it. So we have done the IV, I have said boys and girls rather than gender, condition 1, condition 2. However, I've not said how you'd measure the DV, so on their score on a GCSE maths, something dead simple like that. Okay, and then extraneous variables. So these are variables that you need to consider when conducting research. Extraneous variables, something that affects the DV that isn't the IV. For example, if we're looking at gender and maths ability, something that we want to control for possibly is IQ, because it's not gender, but it might still have an effect on their maths ability. Or what else? Oh, there's hundreds of different extraneous variables. So there's the more various wow, have I given an example of an extraneous variable there with IQ? Possibly if I said IQ was something that was varied between everybody, so everyone has a slightly different IQ, which is something that needs to be controlled for. Confounding variables is something that varies systematically with the IV. So potentially you could argue that one gender is less intelligent than the other gender. If that was the case, that would be something that was varying systematically with the IV. So we're only looking at gender, which is boys or girls, but one would have a higher or a lower IQ, so we can't remove that. So think about the most obvious one is Sperry with the split brain and epilepsy. So an extraneous variable, and underneath are all types of this, is something that affects the DV that isn't the IV, and then we break it down into more specific things. So extraneous variable might be heat, it might be glare on a screen, it might be how tired somebody is, whether they've had breakfast, and they would they would interchange throughout the whole, throughout everybody. Confounding variable is something that varies systematically with the IV, so only one condition experience it and the other condition do not. For example, there might have been a crash. They split the experiment over 2 days, and the first group that come, it's about frustration, and the first group that come don't have a difficult journey at all. The second group, it might be in London, there might be tube strikes, so that would be a confounding variable that systematically varies with the IV. So condition 1, they had the really easy journey to work, and condition 2 had the difficult journey, and that has nothing to do with the IV, which could be anything. So it could be frustration levels measured through levels of testosterone, who knows. And then demand characteristics, you all know this one, altering behaviour due to knowing the aims. So you can either have the good participant effect or the screw you effect. Good participants want to help the experimenter find out exactly what they want to find. Screw you effect, they don't want to help, they want to do the complete opposite, they want to make it difficult. Either way, it's something that's affecting the DV that isn't the IV. So it's not whether it's gender or not, it's whether they're experiencing demand characteristics or not. And then investigator effect, any way that the investigator could consciously or unconsciously alter the experiment. So it might be directly on purpose, they purposely are more helpful to one group than the other, or it might be unconsciously, they don't realise it but they're more hostile to one group than the other as well. Okay, please could you define the following terms and then pause the video and then restart it to check your answer. So, sampling, we have population. The population is the general population, that's absolutely everybody. It's very rare that you would use that term. However, the term you should use consistently is target population. That is everybody that we want to apply the results to. And as you can see here, there's a huge group of people. And then the sample is everybody that we actually manage to get our hands on. So who we actually physically manage to test. Target population, everyone we apply the results to. Sample, who we get to test. So, the target population would be pregnant women. We're not going to be able to test every single pregnant woman in the UK. So instead, we get a sample from Kingsmill Hospital. Or we want to apply something to all students completing A-levels. I can't test every single A-level student, so I take people from West Notts College. So target population, everyone we want to apply the results to. Sample, everyone we manage to actually get our hands on. Bias or representative, so if sample is biased in some way, it means that it's leaning more towards one group than the other. For example, if we said that we were going to apply the results to absolutely everybody in the target population of the UK, and then we took a sample from Mansfield, 1% of Mansfield is not white, so 99% of Mansfield is white. That would be a very biased sample and it would not be representative. In London, it's a huge, well, I say huge, it's not actually that huge, it's still significantly a very white place, but there is much more cultural variation there, so it would be biased to one type of person. Or, without wanting to be stereotypical, if you took a sample of nurses, chances are there's going to be more linked to there's going to be more men than there are women. Now what you have to be careful with there is the target population wants to be representative. So if I want to apply all of my results to my target population is nurses, then it doesn't matter if most of the nurses are female, because that's a representative of the target population. If I had a target population of nurses and they were all male nurses, that wouldn't be representative. However, if my target population was the whole of the UK and I just looked at nurses, it's going to be disproportionately female. So you need to be representative. It needs to look, the sample needs to look like the target population would look. And then generalisable. Well, if it's biased, you can't generalise it. If it's representative, then you can generalise it. You can apply it to everybody within the target population. Okay, describe and evaluate the following: random sampling, systematic, stratified, volunteer, and opportunity. Describe them and evaluate them. Okay. Random sampling, you get all the names of all of the target population, and from that you select your sample using a random name generator or names out of a hat. Okay, so that's random sampling. Random sampling, everybody has an equal chance of being chosen. So you get all the names from the target population and then you randomly select them. Okay, it is not opportunity. Do not get those two confused. Strength, everybody has an equal chance of being chosen, so there's no experimental bias there. You can't influence it in one way or another. Problems, you can't guarantee a representative sample, so you might end up with all women or all men, and it's very time consuming. This is a bit of a naff evaluation point, but if you're really, really stuck, you can talk about time consuming, and then the fact that funding could be allocated elsewhere to kind of improve it in some way. Systematic sampling, all names of the target population. So you get the names of every single person from the target population, all of the pregnant women, all of the A-level students, all teachers, whatever it might be, and then you select from the list every nth term, so every 5th person, every 100th person, every 2nd person, whatever it might be. Strengths, no investigator bias, they can't influence it anyway. However, much like random sampling, however, it can't be truly unbiased. Unless you select every nth term at random, so they could be quite sneaky and think, I think if we use this nth term, we'll probably get this type of person consistently. So you have to select the nth term at random as well. Can't guarantee a representative sample, and time consuming. Stratified, so you get 1 mark. So this is taken from the mark scheme. You get 1 mark for mentioning each one of these. Identification of strata, so this is why it's called stratified. So strata just means every single group that people could fall into. So you identify how many men there are, you identify how many women there are percentage wise, you identify how many are between 0 and 5, how many between 6 and 10, and so on and so on. How many are teachers, how many have this profession, how many earn this much money. So you identify every different variable, every way that people could be different, and then you work out the proportions. So if it's 60% male, 40% female of the target population, your sample should be 60% male and 40% female. From that, you then randomly select people within that strata. So you identify all the men and you select 60%, and then your sample is going to be 100. You identify all the men in the target population and then you select 60. You identify all the women and then you select 40. Okay. Strengths is guaranteed to be representative, which is an excellent. It has high population validity, so therefore you can apply the results confidently. Problems, people are different in lots of different ways. So is gender, age, IQ, they're the only things? There are thousands of different ways that people are different, so is it ever truly representative? And of course a problem is that it's time consuming as well. So funding could be better spent elsewhere to ensure the reliability, the validity of the study. Volunteer sampling, you advert your experiment, you advertise your experiment. Loads of people always mention posters and newspapers. Well, how many people nowadays read a newspaper, do you think? I think the key way that people will probably be able to access people is off the internet, Twitter, Facebook, whatever it might be, to advertise it. You put up an advert and then people self-select, they come to you. So strengths is the easiest and least time consuming, so you can apply your funding elsewhere. However, and you can access a variety of people if you carefully place the advert, so you can still ensure variety. So if you only advertised in one newspaper like the Daily Mail, you're going to get a certain type of person, but if you advertise in every single newspaper, then you're going to get a variety of different people. If you advertise on Facebook and ensure that you share it appropriately in lots of different groups, then you'll get a variety of different people. However, there's a problem with volunteer bias, so you'll get a certain type of person, which would certain types of people volunteer, very helpful people volunteer to be in studies, or people who are interested in the research. That of course reduces the population validity. So for example, you could argue that if it was education, chances are it would be disproportionately female, whereas if it was about leadership, potentially it would be disproportionately male, which would be a problem because there are certain people that would be interested in those areas, being very stereotypical. Another problem is that all volunteers are very similar, they're very helpful, so they're more likely to suffer from demand characteristics. They're interested in the area, so they could probably work out the aim much more easily, and then they want to be helpful, so that reduces the validity of the study as well, because you're not measuring the effect of the IV on the DV, you're actually measuring demand characteristics, which is a type of extraneous variable, calling into question the internal validity of your study, meaning that you can't be confident of cause and effect. So the things we've talked about 100 times already, so you should be alright with that. Opportunity sampling, final one, using whoever is available at the time. So my favourite example of this one is when you're walking down the street trying to not make eye contact with people who want to do marketing, do a survey. Have you got time to just do a survey on your favourite sandwich or whatever it might be? Have you ever shopped at Marks and Spencer's? So opportunity sampling, whoever's available. Me, I decide I'm going to do an experiment, so I just take my students who are available from various classes. Strength is, it's the easiest method, it's the quickest, it's the least expensive, so therefore you can save your funding for elsewhere. However, problem is it's a very unrepresentative sample. If we use one street within Mansfield, 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Mansfield, it's going to be very white, potentially very older people who are retired or unemployed, possibly shift workers. You're not going to get all the people that you might need. So very, very unrepresentative. And also investigator bias. I want to see that men are better than women at maths, so I'm going to select all of my men from Oxford, and then I'm going to select who are doing maths studies, and I'm going to select all of my women from, I don't know, the We Hate Maths Facebook group. Not a very good example, but you get the basic idea. Investigators can very carefully select people that they to get the findings that they want. Answer the following 2 questions for me. What are pilot studies and why are they conducted? Pause the video here. Okay, so pilot studies and the aims of piloting or pilot studies. A small-scale version of the investigation takes place before the true investigation and allows us to check for a variety of different things. Are the materials okay? So is the I don't know, if you're using a certain type of blood test. Is that alright? The procedure, are you doing things step by step? Okay, you're not explaining something effectively. Do you need to change the standardised script or the standardised procedure in some way? And the measuring method, is the IQ test that you're using effective? Or do you need to tweak it slightly? Has it found a ceiling effect? So does absolutely everybody do brilliantly? So it doesn't make any difference. Everyone scores 100%, or through the floor effect, can nobody score any points because it's too hard. So you can change all of those. It allows psychologists to make changes and remove unexpected extraneous variables. It increases the validity of future studies, so it saves you wasting money on funding, and it makes sure you can make sure your study is valid before you conduct it. Conduct a pilot study on say 10 people, roll it out to 1,000 people. And it avoids costly mistakes as well. So you don't want to make a mistake when you're printing out 1,000 questionnaires or whatever it might be. Describe and evaluate the 3 experimental designs for me, please. Experimental designs. Think carefully. Experimental designs, I'm sure you're named repeated measures, independent groups and matched pairs, of course, and not lab, field, natural and quasi, because they are, of course, experimental methods. Experimental designs, repeated measures, independent groups, matched pairs. You could lose loads of marks for this one. So you read this study, the first question could be identify the experimental design, 1 mark gone. If you're talking about lab field, evaluate, give it a strength of it, 2 marks gone. Give a weakness of it, 2 marks gone. Suggest an alternative one if you suggest lab when you've said field, when actually it's repeated measures, independent groups, matched pairs, or suggest how you can improve it. You're losing marks everywhere, so just be really careful. Independent groups, all participants do 1 condition. So there's 100 people, 50 do condition 1, 50 do condition 2. Repeated measures, all participants do all conditions. There's 100 people do condition 1, 100 people do condition 2. Matched pairs, there's 100 people, and they are put into pairs matched on a variable that you are concerned will affect the quality of the research. So again, if we're looking at memory, a key thing that influences memory is IQ. So we would match people on their intelligence, so that we would remove a participant variable, an extraneous variable. Okay, so matching them on variables that we are worried might have an effect on the experiment. And then person A from the pair does condition 1 and person B does condition 2. Problems with independent groups or strengths. Removes order effect. If you're only doing 1 condition, then you can't be affected by fatigue or practice effect. So you can't get tired, or you can't work out and improve, and therefore, of course, it reduces demand characteristics as well. Even if you work out the aim, you can't really make you can't alter your behaviour between condition 1 and condition 2. It reduces demand characteristics. It doesn't remove them completely, because you can go, I'm supposed to do really badly on this test and do really badly, even if you don't do the other tests as well. Weaknesses, not comparing like for like. People are very different. So someone participant variables, somebody might do well in, you can't really compare 2 conditions. Repeated measures, strengths, you are comparing like for like, because it's the same people doing both conditions. There's no issues with participant variables, but it increases order effects, because you might get tired, or you might get practice, so you might get better because you say, I'm used to this IQ test now, I know what they want. Or you might get tired because you've done a 3-hour maths exam and now you've got another 3-hour maths exam. And it also increases demand characteristics. You can work out what the aim is and alter your behaviour between the 2 characteristics. Match pairs, the strengths, they're comparing like for like. You're reducing order effects and you're reducing demand characteristics. Everybody is the same, they're matched in every way possible, technically. So you're comparing like for like, reducing issues with participant variables. However, it's also reducing order effects because you're only doing 1 condition, and it's also reducing demand characteristics because you're only doing 1 condition. Problem, time consuming, money could be better spent elsewhere potentially, and difficult to match on every quality, so you can't match somebody identically on every quality. Define the following terms: random allocation, counterbalancing, randomization and standardization. Really important ones, so please do have a go at these. Pause the video here. Okay, random allocation, allocating participants to conditions at random. So this is about conditions, not random sampling. Random sampling, you get a list of all the target population, then randomly select your sample from there. Then you've got the sample, you then conduct random allocation. So you randomly allocate some people to condition 1, some people to condition 2, and the easiest way to do that is put all the names in the hat. The key thing you must do, and it's something that tripped everybody up in your exam last year, was you take the first person's name out and put them in condition 1, you take the second person's name out and put them in condition 2. Or you take the first 50 names and put them in condition 1, second 50 names and put them in condition 2, make that really clear. Okay, counterbalancing controls for order effects. It doesn't remove them altogether, but it controls for them, because half do condition 1 then condition 2, or condition A and then condition B, and the other half do condition B and then condition A. So if there's a chance of them experiencing practice effect, that's controlled for, because both experience experience practice effect flipped, and the same with a fatigue effect. If they do condition A and condition B, then they get more fatigued than condition B, but only half of them are doing condition A and then condition B, the other half done B and then A, so half of them be more tired in A, and that counteracts it and removes it. Okay. Randomization, everything must be presented in a random order, so the words in the list, the order of conditions, everything that can be randomized can. So for example, selecting random words to reduce bias, so even if you don't realize it, you might be making links and connections. And standardization, everything must be the same for everybody. You've got standardized procedure and standardized script. Everything about the procedure must be the same. The time, the materials used, the room used, anything, the instructions used. So that's a standardized procedure. Standardized script, there should be a script that every investigator reads from to reduce investigator effect. Everybody gets the same information. Identify as many ethical requirements or as many ethical issues as possible. Pause the video here. So, ethics, and this is taken directly from the specification, as all of the headings are, including the role of British Psychological Society's Code of Ethics, ethical issues in the design and conducting, and dealing with ethical issues. So these are all examples of ethical issues. Informed consent, right to withdraw, protection from harm, confidentiality and privacy, and then you need to tell me how you would deal with each one of those. So informed consent, you would ask people to sign a consent form saying that they'd understood what they were agreeing to take part in and they were happy to take part in it. Right to withdraw, you would tell them about the fact they could leave at the beginning, the middle and the end. They could leave at any point, and also they can have their data removed after the experiment takes part. Protection from harm, you would do this by making sure that they weren't being exposed to risks any more than they would do in their everyday day-to-day lives. You could ask the ethics committee to look at that. You could ask a peer to review that one as well. Confidentiality, this is protecting your data. So this is your privacy. You won't share the information with anybody else. You make sure that the person's name can't be matched with their data, any of those things. And then privacy, this is about people controlling the flow of their data. So privacy would all be about the fact that if covert observation, if you were being observed in a public place, then you would alter the way that you behave because you knew you'd be naturally overlooked, observed. Even if you didn't know that you're actually taking part in an observation, you're in public, you wouldn't do certain things. The privacy of your own home, it's very, very different. It wouldn't be right to install CCTV cameras in your bathroom, because I'd like to think the way that people behaved in their bathrooms would be very different from, say, the atrium at college. So it's about controlling the flow of your data. Okay, and that link was to the BPS ethical guidelines, which is a really interesting one to have a read of if you're thinking. It is a big document, but over the summer, if you're thinking about going to university, that is something that you want to have a look at, so you have a knowledge of it. Okay, make notes on peer review and the implications of psychological research on the economy. Pause the video here. Okay. The role of peer review in scientific process. Peer reviews, and this is taken directly from the Mark scheme. Peer review is the process of subjecting a piece of research to an independent scrutiny by other psychologists working in a similar field who are considering the research in terms of validity, significance, or originality. So here, peer review, people who are experts within the field, who are working in a similar field, would look at and consider your research before publication to ensure that it's valid, to ensure that it's relevant, that it's original. We don't want the same piece of research conducted 800 times and published. It's not helpful. So things to consider. It's an important part of the process because it checks for validity. It allows you to make judgment about the credibility of the research. It assesses the quality and the appropriateness of the methodology. So it's essentially like we'd get you to do if you'd conducted a study. We'd say, right now, tell us about that study. Evaluate that study. So it's good because you did this, but you did an opportunity sample. Would you perhaps consider doing a stratified sample to remove observer bias, or get a bigger sample, or use a lab instead of a field, or whatever it might be? They're also able to judge the importance or significance of the research in a wider context. So, is this research relevant? Is it worthwhile? Should we spend time publishing it? Is it a really significant piece of research, or have we consistently found this 800 times before? and then also how original the work is. Does it look at other researchers? Is it doing anything fraudulent, anything naughty? And then say whether it should be published, rejected, or revised. So yes, we'll publish it exactly as it is. It's perfect. No, it's terrible. It shouldn't be published at all. Or it'd be really good, but you just need to be a little bit more honest about your results and maybe think more carefully, because you said that it could have an impact on the way that we give treatment to everybody. Well, actually, your sample is mostly based in the UK, so do you need to revise that? And the reason it's so important is because it helps us keep a journal maintain its integrity. So a journal is just where lots and lots of results are published, almost like a magazine with journal articles in, and will be taken seriously. And of course, psychology is a science, which it is, will be taken seriously as well. Strengths of peer review. It's very good because it makes sure that problems are identified, the weaknesses are identified. It also prevents the publishing of results that aren't relevant, that say this thing is absolutely amazing, it's a wonder drug, when actually it's not. Unacceptable interpretations or fraud. So removes those kind of biased issues. They can judge for the quality of the research, putting it into a wider context, so whether it's relevant or not, and ensures that publishing, they'll be taken seriously. But a problem or weakness is that different authors might not spot every mistake, which is difficult, and also it can suffer from bias. So this person might say, oh no, it's terrible, it's rubbish, and actually it's just because they're behavioural psychologists and the research is written from an evolutionary point of view on the same subject, or possibly say, oh no, that's terrible, we don't want that, because it disproves the theory that they previously supported. Implications of psychological research for the economy. These are the kind of questions you get up. With reference to this example of social change, explain how psychology might affect the economy. So research, understanding how to persuade people to eat more healthily, or outline the implications of psychological research for the economy, refer to the investigation above, and the one above at this point was the effectiveness of cognitive behavioural therapy. So the kind of things that you would talk about, you could talk about social influences. Research tells us how attitudes can be changed, so, and then you link it back. So in this case, eating more healthily means that people will be more healthy, and therefore it reduces costs on the NHS, less time off work sick because they'd be physically more healthy, less chances of obesity, reducing the levels of heart disease and diabetes, which is significant, so reducing the amount of funding for the NHS so it can be put into other areas within the NHS, or possibly even sent to other organisations. Also, time off sick is a problem because, of course, companies lose money, productivity, which means overall the UK uses productivity. If people were never off sick, then we'd be much more productive and have lots more money. The other way that you might answer it, they can lead to improvements in health treatments, manage their health better, and take less time off work. So again, that's an excellent one to use. Always have that one in the back of your memory. It costs the economy £50 billion a year because people are unwell. So better ways of managing people while they're to improve productivity as well. So not only does it stop people being off work, but also improves productivity, and encourage investment from overseas. So if you've got cutting edge research, then they would bring in some money. And then it says credit other relevant points and implications. So all you need to do there is think really carefully, how does this either save or cost the government money, or who are people money? How can we save it? Well, of course, drug treatments are cheaper than mental health treatments. It's better for everyone to be healthy. All of those different things. Okay. Identify and explain reliability. 2 ways of assessing. So define reliability, identify 2 ways, and explain how you would assess reliability and ways of improving reliability. Pause the video. Okay, reliability is replicating the experiment and finding the same or similar results. This is AS stuff, you'll be absolutely fine with it. Can you repeat the experiment in exactly the same way and get again and find the same or similar results? Yes, your results are reliable. We can be confident they're not due to chance, they're not due to fluke, they are significant, they're statistically significant. Ways of assessing reliability: test, retest, exactly, test, rest, test, retest is exactly how it sounds. You test it, then a week later you test it again. So you repeat it to see if it's reliable. So if it was a questionnaire, you would get them to do the questionnaire, and then you would get them to do the questionnaire again, and see a week later, and see if it was still reliable, if it was still relevant. If you find the same results, then you'd be confident it's reliable. Same thing with a maths ability or IQ test. You get them to do it again, and then see if you find the same IQ, find the same maths ability over, let's say, a week later. So it's got to be balanced. You don't want them to remember the results exactly, but also you don't want to leave it 10 years, because by then, especially if they're developmentally, they've improved, they might have done more maths research, things like that. So usually a week is a good one to suggest. And then inter-observer, this is something you did with Super Nanny. So together you worked out the behavioural categories, and then independently you separated, moved away from each other, and then you conducted the research and the observation, and then compared to see whether they positively correlated. You must talk about correlation to get the marks. So if it was about assess the reliability, you would say they'd separate and they would work out the results, the categories together. They would then separate and tally them together. They'd return together and they would correlate them, conduct statistical analysis on them to see if they correlate, to see if they are the same. If they are, then you have high inter-rater observer reliability. If not, you don't. Improving reliability, so we've got, you can operationalise the behavioural categories, make them more specific, you can train observers more to make them better, and also you can make everything standardised. So the best way to make something reliable is to standardise it. Identify and explain validity, the different types of validity, 2 ways of assessing validity and ways of improving validity. Pause the video here. Okay. Types of validity. So validity itself, does it measure what it claims to measure? You all know that. So if we're claiming to measure IQ, we're not going to use a GCSE English paper or a GCSE maths paper. They just tell us how good we are at maths and English. You could also question how valid an exam is for measuring ability in anything as well. Internal validity, is it only the IV affecting the DV, or are there other things? So if it's extraneous variables, it reduces internal validity. So essentially, are we confident of cause and effect? Are we confident it's the IV affecting the DV? Okay. And then external validity, can it be applied outside the conditions of the investigation? So can these results be taken and applied, not just physically, but also to everything? Oh, we're missing population validity there. So can they be moved and applied to other groups of people? Can they be applied to the real world? All of the different time periods, all of those things. Then we've got ecological validity. Is it true to a real life environment? You all know about that one. And temporal validity, is it true to the time period? So for example, Ash was very much a child of its time, we would say. So because conformity was very high at that point because of the historical events that were going off, nowadays we'd expect to find lower validity, so it's not temporally valid. We can't maintain that finding throughout time. And population validity, is it representative of the target population? So if we say this can be applied to all nurses, can it be applied to all nurses? Assessing validity, face validity, does it appear to be measuring what it claims to measure? Find an expert, ask them to have a look at it. Yes, it does appear to be measuring it. No, it doesn't. There we go. Concurrent validity, does a previously validated measure agree? So we did picking food preferences can tell us about your IQ, I think it was. So essentially we were doing an IQ test where you picked, do you like bagels or do you like toast, and you picked whichever one it was, and then you were given an IQ. The way we conducted concurrent validity is I then asked you to take part in an IQ test to see if you got the same IQ, and if they were positively correlated, if they were very similar, then that suggests that you do have that the results do have concurrent validity. If they're very different, it suggests that the measure isn't valid, doesn't have concurrent validity. So for example, you get them to do your newly developed maths test that you think was brilliant, a great way of testing maths, and then you go and do a GCSE maths paper and see if you find similar results. Yes, this person's excellent, they're in the top 10%, but my maths test says they're not. So that's not a good example. Improving validity, use a field experiment for ecological validity. For population, make sure you get a bigger sample, make sure it's valid. Double-blind procedures, that'd be internal validity, cause and effect. You can reduce lots of different types of bias. Demand characteristics, and investigator effect. And revise and edit questions. I think that's a very likely question that could come up, asking how you'd improve reliability and validity, so do think about ways you could make your research better. Name and explain the features of science. Pause the video here. Okay, features of science. For it to be a feature of to be scientific, it must be objective. There must be no bias. It must not be based on personal opinion. It must be purely objective. Empirical methods, direct experience, experimentation and observation. So the two key ones are lab experiments and observations that are empirical methods, so direct experience. Prior to this, philosophers just thought, yeah, this probably happened, and then debated about it. Psychologists do collect empirical data, so they directly observe something to see if it happens. Replicability, so it must be replicable, so you can check for reliability to make sure it's not due to your results aren't due to chance. Falsifiability, it can be tested and if and potentially disproved. So of course, remember this one, you can have a read of it. Everything can be disproved, nothing can be proved. So you must be able to test things to provide evidence against it, or keep testing it to see if there's any evidence you can collect against it. Theory construction, a general set of laws, and you can test predictions. So my theory says this, we'll make this prediction, and then we can test it. So theory construction allows for falsifiability, or it should do. And then hypothesis testing, so you develop hypotheses from theories and then test them. That's an element of science. And then paradigms, shared set of assumptions and methods. If you don't have that shared set of assumptions, then it's considered a pre-science, and this is where the debate about psychology comes from. Is it a science? Is it not a science? Because we don't really, as psychologists, have a shared set of assumptions and methods, perhaps so much as maybe biology, chemistry, physics. They all have these key paradigms that they all agree with, these key assumptions. And then paradigm shifts, so moving from one kind of agreement to another. So in psychology, everybody believed in the behavioural theory. We thought, yes, the behaviour is learnt, and we should all be about observable behaviour. And then there was a paradigm shift more towards cognitive thought, internal mental thought processes. Okay. And can you name and explain the final thing, the structure of a psychological report? Can you name all of them and tell me a little bit about each section? So we have the abstract should be between 150 and 200 words roughly, so essentially a paragraph, and it needs to include all the major elements, and it helps people to identify, is this article something I want to buy because it'll be relevant to my research? Brilliant, yes or no. So a bit like the blurb on the back of a book. Yes, I want to buy this book, it sounds amazing. No, it sounds terrible, I'm not interested in spy thrillers, whatever it might be. Introduction provides background information on theories and studies relevant to the investigation. So background information, so previously so-and-so found this, previously someone else found this, and so on and so on. And then reviewing methodological issues. So previously this has been found, however all of this was conducted in lab studies. I'm going to conduct it in, and so that would be a problem. And then you talk about why lab studies are a problem, and then explain how the current aims and hypotheses were derived. Well, I've decided it was all in lab studies, so it's very artificial, so we're going to conduct it in a field experiment. So it provides background information, what's been found previously, what was the problem with the research that was done previously, how is your experiment going to rectify that. The method, this is taken directly from the mark scheme, this is what the examiner is looking for, must be written clearly, succinct, and in such a way the study would be replicable. So you must be able to replicate, read it back. Could I give this to somebody and they understand it and give me exactly what I wanted? Yes, brilliant, it's replicable. No, more detail needed. You would talk about the design, the sample, the materials, the procedure, and the ethics in there. So all stuff you could talk about. Design, repeated measures, independent groups, and matched pairs. The sample, materials, procedure, ethics, everything about it. Results, you would talk about the descriptive statistics, mean, median, and mode, range, standard deviation. Then you go on to the inferential statistics, calculated value, critical value, and significance level. Did you accept or reject the hypothesis? And also provide any raw data. And finally, discussion, you would summarise the findings verbally by referring back to the intro. So in the results you talk about this suggested this was significant and 15 out of 25 for the mean and all this, so you talk about numbers. Discussion, you'd say, so this means that conformity was higher or conformity was lower, which suggests that this does have an effect or it doesn't have an effect. This is supported by so and so, who I talked about in the introduction. It doesn't support so and so, which suggests that their research is the theories were developed are questionable because they all rely on lab experiments when actually this is a field and it doesn't replicate this research. Evaluate the study, however my sample was a bit naff because it was only 25 people. Next time if I conducted it I would need to use 150 people and I'd need to make sure that they can cover a huge range of cultures, because as we know culture has a significant impact on whether people conform or not. Wider implications, however the fact that people do conform when presented with presented with whatever suggests that we should develop strategies, the government should develop this kind of strategy, or this kind of theory this kind of treatment should be implemented. Okay, so there you go, that is a whistle-stop tour of everything to do with research methods. I would watch in a couple of days time, re-watch this video, see if you can remember anything more, but hopefully you have lots and lots of notes now. Oh, and referencing, forgot about referencing. Hopefully you all know what referencing is. It's just saying, identifying where you got the information from. So if you give a definition or you say, we think that conformity means this, you must tell me who's giving the definition for conformity. So you've done it all in probably in maths or in maths, probably not maths, but English Lit, English Language, EPQ, any of those, you've done referencing, and it's to check for plagiarism, to make sure you're not claiming that something is your own when actually somebody else has said it, and also to avoid fraud for the same sort of reasons. Okay, there you go. Continue to psychology.